Welcome to Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we dive deep into the habits, mindsets, and strategies that set top financial advisors apart. I'm Scott Tatum, and today I'll be talking with Ken to explore his thoughts on a new way of thinking about client segmentation. Ken, let's get our listeners in the right frame of mind. You can't delve deeply into the psyche of clients while dwelling in our busy world. So let's leave the outside world behind for 25 minutes and look deep inside human behavior to explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide. And Ken, I want to guide your insights into something that every single listener to this podcast is absolutely intimately familiar with. And that is client segmentation. Everybody's there, oh, I've done it. But I think what we need to start, if we're going to think about a different way to think about it, we've got to think about how we think about it now. So there's a reason that everybody on our call or that listens to our podcast is familiar with client segmentation. How has it traditionally been deployed in our industry?
Well, it was a great idea as we moved from a brokerage model of transactions, between the broker and the client, to a consulting model where there's a financial plan and there's a long-term engagement and there's a fee being paid, and the broker shifts from a transactional facilitator to an advisor. And over the course of time, that role of being an advisor expanded from the sense of the individual, transaction we're doing right now to a longer term process of advice. And it was that expansion, beginning to see the client in the three-dimensional light as an individual with complex decision-making, values that needed to be appreciated, the amount of money that they were dealing with, this, they're a mass affluent or high net worth or ultra high net worth client, getting clear as an advisor about who this person was in the context of their wealth and what that was going to mean, at least in terms of servicing frequency, meant that we really had to start separating clients into groups so that we could organize ourselves and appreciate these human beings and give these human beings a sense that they were being understood and engaged in a similar way. And so, as you've observed a million times and probably can observe to the audience here, at the beginning of the year, you've kind of set up your expectations for your servicing model. You segment out your business, get a sense of where your business is coming from. And from that perspective, you can begin doing some things with the clients. You can begin organizing yourself. But as you've observed, I think there's a real challenge associated with that, and the downside to that makes the segmentation, process, as you've described it, a nice to have rather than an essential tool that I'm using at a very vital level inside my organization.
Right. I mean, this was set out to attribute time to our wealthiest clients, to make sure that the portfolios are being assigned appropriately. But it's always been hidden from clients, right? And so it's something we do in our annual retreat in December, and we say we're going to call the platinum clients once a week and the gold clients once a month, and we load all of that into our CRM, and we do a jolly good job during January, and it starts to fall apart in February. And by March, you go to look at your to-do list and it's just a stack of unmet calls. And if that resonates with anybody listening to the podcast, keep listening. Because the second issue is, from a psychological perspective, Ken, there's got to be something more meaningful, isn't there, to client segmentation from a client point of view?
Well, there's more meaningful implications of that process, not just from the client's point of view, though that's obviously the most important consideration for advisors who are client focused. There's also implications for the advisor, but this all has to do with grappling with complexity and the advisor's willingness to grapple with complexity. Now, to your point, in a lot of cases, you see advisors set out and try to do this segmentation, understand who their clients are, pay more attention to the gold and the silver and the bronze or whatever their color coding is. And that can become challenging. It's interesting. There's some advisors I know who are very process oriented who are actually really good at sustaining it, that they have systems in place to remind them to call the client. But they're only scratching the surface of what this can mean. And by the way, part of the reason to keep your segmentation process secret from your clients is if the only way that's informing your work as an advisor, the segmentation, the only way that's informing your work as an advisor is to tell you how often to call the client. I don't think you want your clients to know that you call some people more often and some people less often according to how much money they have. Because every client experiences their wealth as the centerpiece of their security and well-being, and they do not want to feel that they're on the short end of the stick in terms of the advisor's attention. They want to feel that the advisor's providing unique and adequate attention to their needs. And it's not helpful to anyone to know that, well, a client that has $50 million gets more of my attention than you that only has $10 million, because your $10 million for you as a client is incredibly important pool of resources that represents your future. You can't go lightly into that. And that's why I think understanding segmenting as informing frequency of contact is an impoverished point of view. It's better than nothing. It does allow you to be paying attention in a systematic way to clients who represent a greater importance to your practice, but it's not it's not delivering the real value of what that observation of your practice can actually deliver. And that delivery is in two places. One place has to do with the client, and one place has to do with the advisor. And I think we should explore both of those, Scott.
Well, let's take a look at the client first, since that's the one that's got to work. So traditionally, and I think because it starts with contact frequency, we have kept segmentation from clients. Is there a way for clients to think about it where they would actually feel enriched by knowing that the advisor had familiarity with certain issues? Or is the only approach to clients that you're bespoke and that I've never seen anything like this? Or do clients actually sometimes enjoy knowing that you're not alone?
Well, clients value enormously knowing that the advisor is familiar with their situation, is drawing on a deep and rich pool of knowledge of previous experiences, and that they can benefit from the experience of others and not have to invent everything out of thin air. I mean, it's a very odd experience to look at advisors. So many advisors were like, well, I need to put my hands on the client's money, and everything has to be customized to the client, as if the client thinks there's some value there. The client wants to know several things. They want to know, do you know more than I do about this? Are you truly an expert? They want to know that the mechanisms you're using to deploy their capital and to manage for taxes are solid, mature, advanced mechanisms, that these things are well designed and are, tested and proven to deliver value. They want to know that you're paying attention to what's going on in the world and the mechanisms you're using are taking advantage of all the best of the developments of our science around asset management. They want to know that you're deeply informed as a professional by the larger pool of knowledge of professionals. And this cuts to almost an instinctive issue with human beings, Scott. It's something really for advisors to really become familiar with. Human beings are unique amongst all creatures on the planet in that we learn. Now, other animals learn. Plants learn by having feedback from the environment. But plants don't have the ability to learn by somebody explaining something to them or telling them a story. Mammals can learn and adapt their behavior by observing other animals, other mammals doing things. This is why the more complex the mammal, the longer their childhood is, because they're observing their parents successfully executing various challenges. And if they can observe enough of that, then the animal can go out and survive on their own. The problem with that is it's a very impoverished way of accumulating information. What humans have been able to do is to be able to gather the experience of many others, good experiences and bad experiences, store them in a form of a story, and be able to share them with other human beings. It is why our species is so dominant on the planet, because we don't have just the benefit of our own trial and error learning process or the observations we've had in our own life. We have the observations of millions and millions and millions and millions of other people distilled into insights that inform decision making. That's what it means to be a professional. If you're a surgeon, if you're an attorney, if you're a psychologist, if you're a financial advisor, you're not making this up based on what you've experienced. You're drawing on a rich pool of professional level knowledge. So for a client to understand that the model we're using to care for you is informed by many others that we have worked with that have had a successful outcome. And by the way, by many others that our firm and our industry has worked with that have had successful outcomes. We have seen the mistakes that others in the exact same situation have made. We will avoid making them because we're informed about it. And we will continue to iterate and reiterate this process over time. So the segmentation of saying to them, look, you're in a new situation in your life, you've achieved this level of wealth. This means that there's some things we need to do. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you the model we use. Let me tell you, we've done this with many others who are in the exact same situation. We know what we're doing here. That gives the client the confidence that they're not alone, that this isn't mysterious, that we're not making this up as we go. It's like the surgeon saying, yeah, I do 7 or 8 of these surgeries a week. This is not, and this may be the most significant event of your life this week, this month, maybe this year, but this is something I do all the time. And you can have confidence in that. That's the impact for the client about using the segmentation.
Boy, it's so enlightening that you went back to that, the essence of human behavior, that we're the only species who can just be told that the stove is hot. We don't need to observe someone burning their hand or to burn our hand ourselves. And that when you think about what that means for financial advisors and their clients, we don't want to waste that incredible knowledge that you've got that, hey, the stove is hot. We can keep our clients from getting burned because we've already observed it. We've observed it numerous times. But it strikes me, Ken, that if the only way we're segmenting is based on tiers of wealth, that's not enough to communicate to clients, we've seen it before. We need to add something to segmentation to make it more meaningful to the client and not just something that we keep from them, don't we?
Well, there's 2 implications there, Scott, and one of them is exactly that. And that is that if we add another dimension of complexity, we can absolutely empower the model that we're delivering to clients in such a way that the client will be delighted, emotionally impacted. By the way, that's what causes clients to talk to their friends about things and to make spontaneous referrals if they're emotionally delighted. That's one implication of it. We should explore that. The other implication is for the advisor's practice itself and their efficiency and effectiveness, not just efficiency, but also effectiveness. So let's see if we can cover both of these here in a couple of minutes. If the advisor will segment by levels of wealth, which inform the range of services and some of the methodologies that they may be using to manage that wealth, but also add a dimension to their segmentation of the life stage in which their client is at. What you get now is an XY graphic. You have on the Y-axis levels of wealth, on the X-axis place in life. So think of the X-axis as a timeline. And in our standard of care models, which we've published a number of papers on, that XY axis becomes a grid that informs segmentation. Every client in the practice can be located where their wealth is and where in their stage of life they are. Well, that opens an implication for the advisor's practice, because now you can think about, what do we want to provide to clients, not only as the level of wealth they have, but where they're at in their stage of life. If they're approaching retirement, that stage can inform all of the things we will deliver to the client. And now all of a sudden you begin to realize you can think strategically about groups of people and the services you want to provide. You can think strategically about running campaigns inside the practice to get everybody up on the same standard of care at that stage of life and at that level of wealth. You can create a checklist that informs, where is my client at in our standard of care? Are there things that remain to be done? In a large practice, this allows you to manage all of the fulfillment of your vision for clients in terms of what we're doing at what stage in life. It allows you to inform the client as they think about moving into the next stage of life. Hey, we've done this before. You're about to transition into retirement in 3 or 4 years. There's some things we need to do that successfully. So for the client, this makes the advisor this character of elevated significance, where the advisor's introducing ideas to the client all the time. And those ideas are matching where they're at in their life journey. And so the client is experiencing this advisor being prescient, drawing on this huge knowledge of professional accomplishment, the stories from many others, helping them avoid problems, inspiring them with new ideas. And by the way, that's what causes them to go home and tell their friend, hey, I'm retiring in 3 or 4 years. My advisor and I are already starting to talk about it. We're doing all these really cool things in terms of planning for the future. That's the conversation that causes the other person to say, well, my advisor's not doing that. Now the advisor can think about curating these experiences. You can quantify and establish a standard of care for each client. That standard can be adapted to each client, but now you can monitor, how well are we doing on fulfilling that. In a large practice, your juniors can all be given the same vision of a standard of care and then manage to that standard. It's powerful. And it's powerful, Scott, because of how it affects the client, who now understands that the advisor sees them more accurately, more diagnostically than just as an individual, that the advisor's not making this up as they go. The advisor's not flying by the seat of their pants, but they're operating a thoughtful model that's informed by deep pools of knowledge. And the advisor has the benefit of being able to think about it strategically and then monitor their own process. So many advisors, when they're in face-to-face with the client, are going to forget dimensions of the client's needs. There's this sense of, we're moving along just fine here. Well, wait a second, wait. They're 5 years from retirement. They're right on the cusp of a new stage of life. We need to start thinking about things differently. Now the client's experience can be managed, and the advisor can not just be efficient so that they're getting it all done and they're not knocking themselves out, but they can be effective. It's a powerful model, and it really does redefine this idea of segmentation, Scott.
And it's something that really can be shared with the client, because as revolutionary as this sounds for a financial advisor, your clients are used to this in other walks of life. I mean, the folks talking to you on this podcast are a couple of old guys. Our relationship with physicians has certainly evolved over the decades. We expect it to evolve. The physicians expect it to evolve. I can barely remember back to my 20s or 30s, but I don't recall having an ongoing relationship with a physician. I don't think a physician wanted an ongoing relationship with me. But as we have aged, we expect a different protocol of engagement. The physician expects a certain standard of care as far as a protocol of engagement. This doesn't just make sense for the physician, it makes sense for the patient. And so this is not, even though this is kind of revolutionary to discuss stages of life and levels of wealth with clients, as revolutionary as it sounds for financial advisors, it's more of a block in our mind than it is in the client's mind, isn't it, Ken?
Scott, this is exactly the point. I am informed by Jay Abraham, who's a great marketing guru, does a lot of work in direct marketing over the years. And he pointed out in one of his books, he said, a protocol or process that is standard operating procedure in one industry can be explosively revolutionary in another industry. And I had the good fortune, obviously, in my previous work in my careers, to be a practicing psychotherapist. And I was licensed in a state that I practiced in. And licensure means in that state that you are professionally qualified to render a diagnosis and then, according to that diagnosis, provide a treatment. That is called in medicine a standard of care. One of my children is a physician. She's a doctor of physical therapy and is advanced certified in neurophysical therapy. Her work every day is done according to protocols that have been defined by research, that research has been approved and practiced by numerous other practitioners. So it's been refined to a fare thee well at a high level of confirmation that she can have confidence that having diagnosed this individual for what their situation is, what the injury was, or what the recovery is, she can now apply these protocols with confidence, knowing approximately how long it's going to take for the recovery. These are standard approaches in medicine. These are standard approaches, by the way, in architecture, in engineering, that there are standards of decision making, how thick the concrete needs to be to bear this much weight. These have all been defined by research. We are now in a position in financial services where we can do the same thing, and it's equally powerful or more so. As you pointed out earlier, for the client to know that they're being treated according to a standard of care that's informed by a deep pool of knowledge of many other clients' experiences, successful and unsuccessful, that informs the advisor's approach. The advisor isn't introducing new ideas to the advisor, they're explaining things they deeply understand to the client. But for the client, who's never been in this situation before in life, for whom all of this is new and novel, this is exciting in terms of reducing their anxiety and increasing their sense of confidence. And maybe this is the place where we really should end the commentary here. Reducing their anxiety and increasing their sense of confidence. Why? Because the advisor clearly knows what they're doing. The advisor has thought it through. The advisor introduced the ideas to them because something about being in this new stage of life has triggered this bigger, broader, richer standard of care for the client. The client is introduced to this. The advisor can explain it to them because they're very knowledgeable about it, because they're familiar with it, because they've done it before. Incredibly reassuring to the client. Guess what? It's that conversation that the client takes home and talks about with their spouse, talks about with their best friend, talks about down at the club, talks about at work, where somebody else hears that and goes, look how excited they are. Look at what they're talking about. I'm not getting anything like this. This is the essence of rainmaking. This is the essence of generating referrals to get clients really excited about what you're doing. And this is a simple, elegant, and powerful way to do it, Scott. So you're right. Segmenting was a good idea. A lot of advisors do it to some extent. This is the logical, fullest expression of that very basic strategy.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for that discussion. I mean, I think you've just taken client segmentation and just stood it on its head. It started as something kind of useful as we moved to an advisory practice about where to attribute time or models or things like that. But the understanding the psychological underpinnings and understanding that clients deeply like to understand that they're not alone, that you've got experience with what is coming, that you've got a crystal ball that does work. It's what's going to happen in my life that can often be anticipated. If you understand that, it lets you take client segmentation to an entirely different level. And once the clients are engaged in it, this isn't something that's hard to stay on top of because clients are going to want you to adhere to that standard of care. So, as our listeners return to their busy world of running their practices, let me remind them that we would love your ideas for future podcast topics. If you've got something, just go to Ken's LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page and just drop us a direct message and let us know what you'd like Ken to talk about on future podcasts. That's a wrap for this edition of Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide.